Hello, welcome, welcome, welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I know we probably have folks joining from many different cities, countries, places around the world. Thank you so much for being here. It's such a pleasure to see names, not faces today, but to get to share this with you. Thank you for joining. So we will be talking about shifting from toxic to thriving. How do we build an organizational culture that drives success? Such a great topic. I'm really excited to be here. I'm Steph Stern. I'm a SIY certified teacher. I'm really passionate about work being a place where people can thrive, where we can really be our best selves. And I'm so excited to be joined here by Lindsay today on the SIY Global team. You may see her in the chat. Yep, there she is. And if you need any tech support, please feel free to message Lindsay directly. She'll be also answering some questions in there, sharing some important links. Thank you so much, Lindsay, for being here today and being our Zoom support. I'm really excited to dive into this topic today for a number of different reasons. It's very timely. I think we're an understatement to say that we're in some tough and uncertain economic times, layoffs, great resignation. And it's also a personal topic to me. I've noticed an enormous difference. I worked for an organization, I'm thinking of one in particular, a number of years ago, where I really didn't feel respected or supported. I remember feeling a sense of dread every morning going into work. I didn't even last a year. I felt so depleted at the end of each day. And I really wasn't able to contribute as much. And it was really quite draining for me emotionally as well. Versus in organizations and teams where I have felt connected, supported to thrive, it's made an enormous difference. I regularly felt excited to go to work, often happy to go above and beyond. I felt a sense of meaning, a sense of belonging with the team. And I really want everybody to feel that way at work. We spend so much time in our working days. So this topic really means a lot to me. I'm curious to hear a little bit about what does it mean to you? So if you would open your chat window and share a little bit about what brings you here today. What inspired you to join today's webinar on this topic? You may need to pop open your chat window. It may be kind of hidden in the bottom toolbar. And we may need to make sure, okay, the chat is working. I was going to say, you may need to make sure that you can select everyone so that we can all see. All right, so wonderful. Manager suggested it. Oh, somebody's got a great manager. Curiosity, being a better leader. I love it. We just have an SIY fan. Wonderful. Trying to coach and teach SIY in a toxic culture is hard. Yes, absolutely. So maybe some data to show why this is such an important topic would be helpful. I want to pick up some ideas so this doesn't happen again. Oh, I'm sorry for folks that have had a lot of toxic experiences in the past, a lot of curiosity. Yeah, so I'm seeing both a lot of wonderful ambitions and aspirations here, and also a number of folks that are saying that they work in toxic environments. And I know that can be so hard. So a sense of what can you do about it? How do you actually create positive impact? So we'll get into all of that a little bit more today. First, I want to say a little bit about who the we is behind the webinar. So as you may or may not know, Search Inside Yourself, or SIY, originated at Google as a training for employees. And the founders launched the Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute, or SILI, as an independent nonprofit for the last 10 or so years. And just last year, the Institute launched SIY Global as its sister organization to expand its impact with the mission of bringing human-centered skills to work. And in everything Search Inside Yourself, everything that SIY Global does, we use three core pillars across all of our programs: emotional intelligence, which I'll talk about a little more in a moment, based on neuroscience and organizational research, and with a foundation of mindfulness and awareness practices. So based on these three concepts, today I want to really focus on how workplace culture is a key determinant for the health of an organization. And when I'm talking about health, I'm talking about actually a wide variety of outcomes. Things like employee satisfaction, retention, engagement, overall performance. So it's both the actual health of the employees, mental and physical, as well as the health of the organization and ways that drive the bottom line. There's also a high cost to toxic workplace culture. I see from chat, and I don't need to tell many of you that, right? You're experiencing it yourself, but we can often excuse some toxic behavior or people saying like, oh, they're a high performer, it's worthwhile. But I think it's important to know that there is a real cost to allowing that kind of behavior. And I'll also be emphasizing how building a thriving culture requires emotional intelligence. It's really the foundation for a more humane workplace. And I'll just share one statistic that really highlights this well from a recent HubSpot survey. They saw that 82% of employees would consider leaving their job for a more empathic company. 82%. So like the vast majority of people want more empathy at work so much that they'd be willing to shift. So as you can see already, there's a lot of really interesting, great research on this topic. I have a lot I want to share with you today, and so I might move through some of it a little quickly. You will be getting slides afterwards, so if you kind of miss a detail, you'll be getting the recording as well, so references for you to go back to. This also is going to be interactive. I'm going to continue to use the chat to share, and you'll also have some time for reflection and journaling as we go along. I really would love you to have a chance to just try on these ideas, see how you might start to apply them for yourself, for your teams, your organization. I know some of you might be in a position, a leadership position where you might have more influence. Some of you might be individual contributors. We all show up and impact the teams we work on and the organizations around us. Some of you might also be coaches, consultants, looking for your next job. So when I mention reflecting on your team and organization, you might think of a client, you might think of a past experience, you might think about what you want to bring into a next role. So I hope all of this can apply in some way. So why now? In this moment, we're facing some really tough and uncertain economic conditions. And whether you call it great resignation, quiet quitting, we've seen higher levels of turnover since the start of COVID than ever before. And the single biggest predictor of employee turnover is toxic culture. We're also seeing a huge decline in engagement. Engagement actually was steadily increasing until the beginning of the pandemic, and it has dropped and keeps dropping year over year, according to a recent Gallup poll. On the other hand, companies that have a reputation for a positive and healthy culture have experienced lower than average turnover, especially during the first 6 months of the Great Resignation. And it is possible to actually make this shift to foster an organizational culture that allows both people and the business to thrive. So that's why we're excited to share all of this with you today. As I dive in, I want to say a little bit about what culture is. So I like to think of culture as how and why things get done. So both the reasoning behind it as well as the methods and process. And it reflects a lot of different elements of people's work experience, the environment in which people are working, behaviors, what behaviors are encouraged, acceptable, discouraged, or even punished, the values, both written values and actually lived out values in an organization. Rituals, we might not think of work as having rituals, but how we gather, that could be anything from staff meetings to annual performance reviews. There are a lot of things that get formalized as rituals in an organizational culture. And language, of course, language shapes culture. I haven't yet to meet or work with a team that doesn't have its own like acronym soup, its own language shorthand. That's how we figure out how to communicate with each other, what things are important, and what kind of creates and shapes the culture. So culture is about how we relate to those around us. Importantly, it's both about people's experience of working there as well as shaping the work product and outcome. And because it's about how we work with people, the fabric of these behaviors, these rituals, the language we use, the values, is emotional intelligence. So to create some shared language just in our webinar today, let me define emotional intelligence for all of us. Emotional intelligence is the ability to understand and manage one's emotions and understand the emotions of others. Emotional intelligence includes these 5 key skills: self-awareness, self-regulation, our ability to understand and work with our emotions skillfully, motivation, empathy, and social or leadership skills. So how we take in information about ourselves as well as those around us. These skills are essential for building healthy, productive, and collaborative work environments. I want to say a little bit more about the importance of culture. You're probably here because you already think it's important. Some of you maybe just because your manager said so. So I want to highlight why culture is important. It might be helpful reminders for you. It might be ways that you might want to make the case to others to really pay attention to this. In a Deloitte study, they found that 87% of organizations cite culture and engagement as one of their top challenges. So this is something that organizations all over are really struggling with, but it's a really important thing to wrestle with. Company culture directly influences employees' experience and company performance on a number of different key metrics, from financial performance tied directly to the bottom line, retention, better culture, better the retention, lower turnover. Also innovation. When an organization has a more positive, more inclusive culture, they're actually better able to innovate, to take on new ideas, to adapt to change. Really important in today's economic times. And also employee satisfaction. Culture shows up as one of the most important factors in how happy, how satisfied an employee is with their work environment. According to Deloitte, organizations that create a culture defined by meaningful work, employee engagement, and strong leadership are outperforming their peers. So it doesn't matter what sector you're in, the culture really matters. So if culture matters this much to business, what happens when a culture is unhealthy or has unhealthy traits? So that's what we're calling today a toxic work culture. When we talk about a toxic work culture, it doesn't necessarily mean that the whole organization is toxic or terrible. It might just mean that there's some pervasive cultural traits that are a little toxic, or maybe pockets of organization, especially in a large organization. You may have a team or pocket that has its sort of unique culture, and maybe in a negative way. Toxic traits can be extreme, like cultures of harassment, unhealthy competition, undermining. They can also be subtle, like a sense of pressure that you have to work extra hours to be seen as competent or promotable, or an environment where it doesn't feel okay to be honest. We'll get into that a little bit more. So toxic cultures can actually look like many different things. I'm curious to hear from you about your experience. What cultural traits do you think have a toxic impact in an organization? And this could be from your current organization or team, could be from a previous job, maybe something you've even noticed in the news or something you've heard friends or colleagues complain about. So once again, popping open in chat. Love to hear. Yeah, lacking transparency, hidden expectations, shaming, micromanagement, blaming, no appreciation. Yeah. Siloed mentality, a lot of lack of communication, gaslighting, blame, need to move too fast. Yeah, and that can really create a toxic expectation, bullying, competition, separation, secrecy, lack of empathy, fear, criticism, perfectionism. Yeah, lack of psychological safety, undermining. Yes, absolutely. So long work hours, having no voice, lying. Oh, you're touching on all of the things that we will be touching on. I'm going to be grouping these into 5 main themes. This is from research from Dr. Donald Sull at MIT and his son, Charles Sull at CultureX. They did a research with a really large data set of companies, mostly in the US, on what was driving the Great Resignation. And they found that the single best predictor of turnover is this idea of toxic culture. And they came up with what they call the toxic 5. The toxic 5 are the biggest drivers of toxic culture and turnover. And the first one is disrespect. If there's a lack of consideration or dignity for others. That might look like no boundaries for working hours, some bad behavior. This could look like people just not feeling respected in their relationships or in the policies or systems of the organization. Could be urgent demands at 5 p.m. It could be disparaging remarks from a manager or colleague. Can also include a lack of positive feedback. To really be respected, we have to know that we are positively respected. So disrespectful, that's the single biggest predictor of how an employee views their culture. The second one is not inclusive. There's a lack of equity across areas, including gender, race, sexual orientation, also age, really anything else. A sense that people aren't being treated fairly. It also includes nepotism. If there's a sense that a manager or leader might be favoring certain people over others. And it can also include a sense of a clique or a feeling of an in crowd. Anything where people are made to not feel welcome or not feel included in decision making. A lot of comments in the chat really echoing this, right? And so that could be something like not recognizing or supporting religious holidays, not including people in a process of decision making when their work is impacted. This idea of the clique and the in crowd really stuck with me and made me think about ways I've actually contributed to a toxic culture in the past. Things like not being very welcoming of new hires, sticking with people I already know. I worked in an organization a number of years ago where there was a crew that got together every Tuesday for lunch. And we didn't mean to include anybody, but the group kind of had its own momentum. And it made me think back of who was not being included in that. In what way were we forming a little bit of a clique? The third of the toxic 5 is unethical. Unethical behavior could include dishonesty, lying, cheating, also a lack of regulatory compliance. A more mildly toxic version here might look more like making false promises or maybe sugarcoating, like if leaders paint a rosier picture of the business than is really true. All of that lack of honesty erodes trust. As I was preparing for this webinar, I was talking to my aunt about this idea of toxic culture, and she shared a story a number of years ago. She actually quit a job because it felt unethical. She was expected to overbill her clients, kind of rounding up. It wasn't hugely egregious, but it felt unethical to her. And when she quit, her boss was shocked and said, "Why didn't you tell me?" And my aunt said to him, "Well, you were really clear about what you wanted. It didn't feel like it was open to question." So it was an example of unethical behavior that got so infused in the culture, it didn't feel like a choice. It didn't feel like something she was safe to speak up about. The fourth of the toxic 5 is cutthroat behavior, something like backstabbing, sabotaging, ruthless competition. This is more than just the friction of collaboration. Like, of course, people can be difficult to work with. Some organizations get very siloed, but cutthroat is really when people are undermining one another. It might look like taking credit for somebody else's idea for the sake of your own promotion or progress or promoting your team over another. A few years ago at Search Inside Yourself, we had hired a salesperson, and he thought we were the nicest culture. He was sharing that at his old company, colleagues used to steal proposals and quotes for new clients off of each other's desks so they could make their individual sales quote. Talk about cutthroat. Ooh, sounds like a really hard environment to be in. The last one I want to talk about is abusive. This is the 5th of the toxic 5. Abusive looks like bullying, harassment, hostility. It might look like managers taking out their frustration on their team, a culture of yelling. This is more than just disrespectful. Abusive, it has a sense of being like wrongly used. And we know that these pockets of toxicity can occur anywhere in an organization. The leadership of the culture of the team, of the organization really creates the microculture. So there's no evidence that toxic cultures are correlated with specific organizational functions or sectors. They can exist anywhere, and positive, thriving cultures can exist anywhere. So it's often a quality of the leadership. And I think you can probably see a strong connection here between these toxic traits and a general lack of emotional intelligence. These are really fear-based behaviors, based on fear, designed to evoke fear and control. And so I want to pause for a moment and just have you imagine working in this kind of culture, working in a culture where you don't feel respected, you don't feel included, behavior feels unethical, there's a sense of cutthroat competition, and maybe even behaviors that are abusive. If you just sort of imagine that, being part of that team, just notice how it feels. Notice if there's any response in the body. I know I feel, yeah, traumatic. I feel sort of closed, shut down, constricted, can't show up authentically. Absolutely. When we start to feel under threat, our brains actually freak out, right? It's a limbic or amygdala response where we go into a fight, flight, freeze mode. We don't have access to our full capacity, and it can become a downward spiral and one with real costs. I want to talk a little bit about the costs of a toxic culture. Again, behavior can often be excused as, oh, that's a high performer. So that this underscoring the sense that there are real organization or team-wide costs of a toxic culture, I think is so important. Toxicity has an impact on so many aspects of an organization, including attrition, right? Higher turnover, well-being, and that's mental and physical. I think this statistic is so shocking. A person is 35 to 55% more likely to be diagnosed with a major disease if they are working in a toxic culture. So huge impacts on our physical well-being. Of course, it makes it harder to hire, and it depletes the morale. 1 in 4 working Americans dread going to work. Dread. I've been there, right? It takes a real toll on our performance and the rest of our life. So if you've worked in a toxic culture or know somebody who does, you know how depleting and demoralizing it can be. The good news, of course, is we can do something different. So this is all great motivation to be here, to try and do something a little different in our teams and organizations, which I'll get to in a moment. But first, I want to share a little example of some toxic workplace cultures. Sadly, we can probably find them all over. I know a number of you in the chat have alluded to places you've worked too. Wells Fargo, the bank, is one example. They faced Senate Banking Committee complaints over their toxic sales culture that resulted in this very large settlement fine. I'm not saying Wells Fargo overall is toxic, but this was actually in their San Francisco headquarters. They had such a high pressure toxic sales environment that salespeople were driven to deceive customers and actually open unauthorized accounts for them. So talk about unethical and cutthroat. Toxic cultures also can appear in places where you might least expect it, like the Ellen DeGeneres show. Employees there claim that they dealt with abuse and instances of racial microaggressions and feared retributions for raising complaints. Ellen herself was called out by over a dozen employees for being verbally abusive and mean. And I don't mean to pick on either of these two. I see we have even a Wells Fargo customer in here, so can testify to this. I don't mean to pick on any of these two, and I should say that they have not even admitted any wrongdoing in this case, despite very hefty fines to their companies and public impact to their brand. We can also think about many other examples in the news right now. Twitter, for example, VW a number of years ago for faking admission numbers. So really my point here is that toxicity exists across sectors and can have a significant and public impact to a company, not to mention to the lives and well-being of all of the employees involved, as well as the customers that might be harmed. So I'm going to pause to give us some chance for a little reflection and journaling. I really believe that building a thriving culture starts with an awareness of what's not working. So we're going to do some journaling. You can do it by hand if you have something to write with or on, or you can type on the computer. And you'll have a few minutes to just reflect on your team, organization. And this is just for you. I'm not going to ask you to share anything, any details with us. So you can be truly honest with yourself. And after this, we'll move into how to address these challenges. So we're starting with what's not working to understand how we can improve. This is an important first step. So you're going to have a couple of minutes to think about, are there any signs of the toxic 5 in your organization or team? And how do they show up? So again, even if your culture is generally strong, are there some toxic attributes present, however mild, right? Remembering toxic could be extreme or overt, might be more subtle. So here they are again, the toxic 5. I'm going to give you 2 minutes to reflect and journal. How is this showing up for you today? Please go ahead. All right, so bringing your sentence to a close. And I know this can be hard sometimes to start thinking about what isn't working. So I appreciate you taking the time to reflect honestly. And again, this is just the first step to understanding where we are so that we can make this shift from toxic to thriving. So we're now going to talk about what does it take to actually make that shift? What are some of the antidotes to the toxic 5 and the role that emotional intelligence plays to create a foundation for a thriving culture? Before I get into it, of course, I want to hear from you. What are some signs of a thriving workplace culture? Again, please feel free to put it in chat. There's so much wisdom in this group. I'm loving all of the chat. I wish I had time to read everybody's comment. So I'll, of course, just be picking some highlights. But what are some signs of a thriving workplace culture? Energy, collaboration, transparency, trust, humor. Yep. Ability to speak up, being supportive, laughter. I love all of this piece about laughter and humor, ability to make mistakes, true sense of caring, meeting goals, generous listening, well-being, play, interest in other people's lives outside of work. I think that's really a beautiful one. Happy people, deep psychological safety. Oh, this is lovely. I wish this webinar were a team. I would love to work with all of you. I love all of these answers. Being allowed to give criticism without fear, warmth, absolutely. Mental health Avengers, I love that. A lot of gratitude, well-being, yes. So I'm going to be sharing some key attributes of a thriving culture. Again, kind of summarizing the things that are being mentioned in chat and pulling them together as antidotes to the toxic 5. And these are all pulled together from research on high-performing teams and organizational culture. And as I go through, I'm going to share a lot of different behaviors of a thriving culture. And I encourage you to jot down anything that might spark for you. We're going to have another chance to do some journaling in a minute after I go through them. And so I would love you to just notice, where do you feel excited to try something on, see something that might work for you? So as I'm talking, if you do notice anything, just jot something down quickly so that you have it there when we get to our next journaling and reflection. Okay, so the first shift that we want to make is a shift from abusive or disrespectful to a culture of respect. And again, feeling respected is by far the most important element to employees when they are ranking their company's culture. In the research by Donald and Charles Sull, respect came out as twice as important as things like supportive leadership and job security, and almost 3 times as important as benefits and perks, right? So I think there can be this myth, oh, if people are just paid well, that will outweigh a toxic culture, and that just doesn't seem to be the case according to research. So of course, people want to feel a sense of respect at work. People want to feel respected as people and respected in their work. I'm seeing a request to repeat that stat. So respect is almost 3 times more important than benefits and perks in terms of how people rank their company's culture, and in a way that has implications for turnover, how long they will actually stay in that organization. We'll be sharing links to that key research study in the follow-up email after this webinar. Thank you, Cindy, for asking. And yes, it's totally crazy. So respect is built through a lot of different behaviors, but things like attentive listening, mindful listening. Somebody mentioned this in the chat. Of course, we want to feel listened to. We want to feel like our voice is actually being heard. And unfortunately, listening is not a skill that is actually taught or emphasized that often. Recognizing achievements is an important part of feeling respected. There's so much work that goes unseen. So just taking time to thank people for their support, their help, recognizing their effort. At Search Inside Yourself, there's a wonderful tradition of starting staff meetings with an appreciation round, the chance to recognize people publicly and to receive that kind of appreciation. They also make space to talk about what's hard, really humanizing the range of human experiences at work. Giving and receiving supportive feedback is also critical for respect. So respect is not just being nice in a sugarcoating way. It's actually helping people to fulfill their potential, to work at their best. And that means giving and receiving feedback in a respectful way about how people can actually grow and improve. Respect is also about seeing people as whole human beings. People have full lives. So it's not just about who they are at work, but they may have other personal priorities, aspirations, emotional ups and downs. And so seeing people as people, as whole human beings that are much more complex than maybe the slice we see just in the workplace. So a respectful culture is one that's really built on empathy and compassion and an ability to hold difficult situations with kindness. So it's really emphasizing some of the social or interpersonal aspects of emotional intelligence. The second shift that we want to make is from a culture that is cutthroat, backstabbing, unhealthy competition, into a culture where there's a psychological safety. People orient to a greater team, right? So this is a little bit about how individualistic are people. Are they just out for themselves, or is there a sense of safety where they feel part of something larger, where they feel safe to contribute what they have to offer in service of the greater team and organization? People need to feel safe to ask for help or say, I don't know, without fear of punishment or retribution, and in order to enhance team performance. It means learning from mistakes. The ability to learn from mistakes requires the freedom to make mistakes, to acknowledge them, to know that you're not going to be shamed or punished, but that you actually get to mine the learnings and improve for next time. That helps create space for new ideas. New ideas might include challenging the status quo, all of this is what makes a team operate as more than the sum of its parts, right? So there's that connection between culture and performance that allows for really productive collaboration. Collaboration really means also embracing productive conflict, feeling safe to disagree. This is a key piece that we really dive into in the Effective Teaming program. That's one of SIY Global's wonderful programmatic offerings. This idea that in order to actually be a high-performing team, you need to feel a sense of psychological safety, connection. You also need intellectual friction. You need this ability to disagree productively in a respectful way that feels safe, to allow teams to really build on each other, allow people to build on each other's ideas and come up with something better together. Among companies that have remarkable cultures, psychological safety was the #1 trait that they tend to have in common. Psychological safety has also been shown to improve many different business metrics, such as innovation, adaptability, both of which are really critical in today's workplace. And I think you can see that psychological safety requires emotional intelligence, requires a lot of self-awareness, self-management of our own feelings and emotions, how we show up to create a safe environment for others, and also a lot of empathy to allow other people to contribute to create a safe environment for them. The third shift I want to talk about is shifting from a culture that is not inclusive to one that is inclusive, one that really values diversity, equity, belonging. This connects to and builds on psychological safety, but being inclusive at work might look like accepting and valuing people for who they are. That includes seeking out a diversity of people and perspectives. Again, this is sort of how a team becomes more than the sum of its parts. No one person has a complete picture on anything. And by seeking out a diversity of people and perspectives, by ensuring that everybody has a voice and is heard, it creates a sense of belonging where people feel like they can really be welcome, where they can contribute, where they know that their perspective will be considered. And again, that's how a team becomes more than the sum of its parts. If you imagine all of these people with different perspectives and skills coming together to lend what they can to a bigger effort. Thinking about this, it made me think, years ago, I worked with this guy, Tom, who every Friday would come around. He was a senior leader in the organization who would literally walk around the office and do what he called a Friday morale check. And he would kind of call out Friday morale check and then make sure to stop by everybody's desk. And it was just a beautiful, simple way for him to make people feel really seen, welcome, included. And it was a really lovely practice. When a workplace is inclusive, research has shown a lot of different benefits. Higher revenue growth. So this is not just a fluffy idea. This is really tied to some key business metrics. Readiness to innovate, an increased ability to recruit a diverse talent pool. And if a workplace is inclusive, it tends to see more than 5 times higher employee retention. So true inclusion really requires emotional intelligence. Self-awareness is needed to check our own biases. Empathy allows for better perspective taking, valuing other people's opinions. To be inclusive, we also need this ability to productively and respectfully work through conflict and not just shut other people down. So an inclusive culture is built on self-awareness and empathy. All right, the last shift we're going to talk about is shifting from unethical to a culture of integrity, of honesty. And this applies to how employees are treated, as well as how the organization treats its customers or clients and thinks about its impact in the world. But in our own behaviors, integrity might look like being responsible for our own actions, both positive and negative ways maybe we haven't done well. It means demonstrating trustworthiness, being reliable, living up to our word. That might mean that we need to recognize our own limitations and make responsible choices so that we're careful about what we do agree to. It might mean owning up to some mistakes. That builds a sense of trust and honesty, and again, learning from mistakes. And it might also look like giving credit where credit is due, right? Raising up people around us when we see them doing wonderful work. Integrity is certainly about more than just emotional intelligence, but it relies on us to be honest, to be self-aware as individuals about our impact on others, and to be aware of our organization or team's impact on the world. Integrity is also about living in alignment with our own values. There's a beautiful values exercise in the Search Inside Yourself core program. Such an important piece to really articulate and name those values so we can live them out in the world. All right, so those are the Thriving Four. And I want you to take a moment, I invite you to take a moment to just imagine being part of a team or culture where you feel respected, you feel psychologically safe to speak up and contribute, you feel included, you feel like you belong, you're welcome on the team, and where you and others act with a sense of integrity. I think you can sense this is not a fear-oriented kind of environment. It's based on and builds trust and connection. How does it feel to be part of that kind of a team, that kind of an organization? Maybe just seeing if you notice anything in your body as you just imagine these Thriving Four. Yeah, Dominique says it feels wonderful, and I've worked with teams like this, light, motivating. Yes, I feel a sense of excitement, joy, a desire to be there, to contribute, empowered. Yeah, gratitude, expanded. Yeah, there's a sense of openness. And there's a great neuroscience reason for this too, right? When we feel safe, we actually have access to our full cognitive capacity, access to that prefrontal cortex that actually unlocks the more creative kinds of thinking, the more complex reasoning. So we actually, again, that through line between feeling like we're in a thriving, safe culture and to performance. So let me give an example of a particularly thriving culture. I hope we can all think of many examples here, but I want to just share one that stands out. And this is Southwest Airlines. It's known for having a hardworking, fun, loving culture. They have a wonderful set of values, many of which align with aspects we've been talking about. They have core values like treat others with respect, be a passionate team player, celebrate successes. They also name what behaviors are rewarded and which ones are punished. They reward humor, they punish dishonesty. They really created this place where people want to work. Now, I know that Southwest Airlines was in the news in December for some holiday travel snafu food, lots of canceled flights. And I thought about bringing in a different example, but I actually think it's important to highlight that everybody makes mistakes. A wonderful, thriving culture doesn't mean that nothing will ever go wrong. However, it does determine how you might handle the mistake and maybe the long-term impact. So with Southwest, their culture allowed them to say they did make a mistake. And they actually have such a history of being a valued brand with high customer loyalty that they will most likely weather this with very little long-term impact to their bottom line. Southwest in general is an example of how being human and putting their employees first can actually also drive huge dividends. So this has contributed to 44 years of profitability, which is especially remarkable in the airline sector, which is notorious for bankruptcy and razor-thin profit lines. They have the lowest number of customer complaints in the industry and an 85% employee satisfaction score. So again, strong culture doesn't mean you'll never make any mistakes, but you can keep going and get through them and sort of with a sense of getting through it together. One other example I want to highlight, this well-being agreement or manifesto was shared by Google last year. They adapted it from the UK government. It's now been adapted and modified by a number of other organizations since. But they really wanted to normalize the range of human experiences that might be happening. It's a really powerful way to respect people. So I'm not going to read everything, but I love so much about this, right? It's okay to say, I don't know. It's okay to be confused. It's okay to smile. It's okay to have a cry, right? It's normalizing some of the ups and downs that we all have day to day. It normalizes that you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to always know or get it. It really gives people permission to be human. So I'm going to highlight a few other things that we can do to create a thriving culture. And I will say changing culture is a process. Think about it a little bit as like shifting a tanker ship, right? It's a process that involves a lot of people, a lot of consistent effort over time. And so there are a lot of different places to start as well. So I've already named a number of attributes and behaviors that create a thriving culture, but I want to give a few more ideas. So of course you can practice and role model any or all, I hope, of the thriving behaviors that we've talked about, right? Recognizing people for effort, ensuring other people have a voice, owning, normalizing mistakes for yourself and others. You might create a well-being agreement, like we just saw. That could be something for your team, for your whole organization, could even be something for yourself, maybe just starting with your one-person team, creating what looks like well-being for you. Maybe sharing that just with one colleague. You might also get curious about what people need and find ways to support them, right? We talked a little bit about listening, practicing some mindful listening to better understand what's happening with your colleagues, with your team, and what changes might be needed to create more of a sense of support and connection among the people you work with. You might also include specifically learning about your team's fears and insecurities. Fear tends to get more intense when we don't acknowledge it, when we don't talk about it. And shifting might require normalizing that it's okay to be afraid. It's okay to have some insecurities and to talk about them. Of course, we all bring lots of fear into the workplace. And I read recently that the number one fear at work is being irrelevant. Right? We want to be respected. We want to feel like we're contributing. We want to feel like we have relevant skills and things to bring into our team. And then, of course, you might also invest to enhance the emotional intelligence in your culture, in your team, right? Again, emotional intelligence, these foundational human skills are the basis of a thriving culture. So you might actually want to have some training, and that can be a beautiful shared experience as part of a thriving culture as well. All right, so I'm gonna ask you to do a little bit more reflection and journaling. I'll put back up the list of attributes in a moment, and I want to ask you to choose an area that you would like to just put some attention on for yourself, for your team, your organization. Maybe it's building on something that really sparked as I walked through all of these different thriving attributes and ideas for what you might be able to do. So the journaling prompt is, what initial steps would help you build or enhance a thriving culture in your team or organization? You're going to have a few minutes to consider any initial steps you might want to do to get started. And this could be something small that you can do out immediately. Could be something that you might want to work towards a larger change. I'm going to also ask you to just pay attention to your internal experience as you're writing, as you're participating in this exercise. What thoughts are you noticing? Is there a sense of excitement, possibility? Is there a sense of despair? Oh, this is never going to change. And what ideas might have the most energy and excitement as you go through? All right. So you're going to have a couple minutes to just think about initial steps. And here are the five toxic five and the 4 antidotes. Thank you, Lindsay, for putting the prompt in the chat. All right, go ahead. right. So bringing your sentence to a close. I hope this is just the beginning of you starting to explore this idea of shifting to thriving. So if that felt too short, please encourage you to continue maybe after the webinar later today. Maybe this is something, even a prompt that you might take back and share with your team. Again, we're going to share recordings, slides, resources, so you'll have more opportunities to dive in. Love to hear what's something that you are taking away from today. Maybe it's something you learned, an insight. Maybe you want to commit to taking a specific action. Love to hear from you in the chat. If there's anything that you want to make sure that you take away from today's session. A well-being agreement. Wonderful. Yes. Such a beautiful idea. It sounds like that was a popular well-being check. Validating the discomfort of trying to thrive in a toxic environment is worth it. Yes, I think that's a great insight. Yeah, it's really helpful to see how hard it is to thrive in a toxic environment for good reason. So validating that not personal. It's not personal. Mutual respect and caring about well-being, leaving the toxic environment. Yep, sometimes the choice to leave is needed. Checking in with folks on their perceptions of the work environment. Oh, Friday morale check. I love that. I'll have to let Tom know he's inspiring other people. To discuss the toxic five within your team. Yeah, people first. You're the master of your own outcome. Making a workplace a happier place. Leaving is always an option, reminding people that they can choose that too. Absolutely. Yeah, that respect is 3 times more important than benefits and perks. Absolutely. Not a reason to underpay anybody, but just to really value respect and gaining a sense of how you can influence a toxic environment. Yeah, maybe you can and maybe you can't. Exactly. It's worth an effort. It will depend on the larger culture. Seeing a question reminds us of how the Friday morale check works. It can work however you want. The example I had was of a leader in my organization, this guy, Tom, who literally would just walk around the office saying Friday morale check, and he'd stop by everybody's desk and just ask how everybody was. It was just a really sweet, humanizing, connecting thing. Listen, 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 saying thank you more often. Emotional intelligence is so important. Oh, I love this. I could spend a long time just reading all of these beautiful shares in chat. Thank you for that. But as we come close to the top of the hour, I want to share a few next steps. So again, we'll email you to share a recording, slides, some resources for you to support you to take your next steps. We also have a discount code for you for some of the upcoming public programs that SIY Global is offering. So we're offering 15% off registration. That was a wonderful next step to take if you're interested in working on your own emotional intelligence, or if you want to come and check out one of our programs in order to maybe take it back to your organization. So thank you, Lindsay, for putting the code in the chat there. Search Inside Yourself Global has a number of wonderful training programs. So I've shared a lot about how emotional intelligence is the foundation of a thriving culture. And of course, our team at SIY Global would love to support you in this. In addition to the original core Search Inside Yourself program, we also have an Adaptive Resilience series, effective teaming program, which is a wonderful short option specifically on team performance. The team can come in and deliver the program for you, but also if you're interested in teaching these sorts of programs within your organization, there's an organizational teacher training program. It's a really wonderful, immersive experience to be able to facilitate and teach these skills to your colleagues. And it just to really recommend it. It's a fabulous program for you as a teacher, and so wonderful to be able to be embedded in an organization and be able to enhance the emotional intelligence skills of the employees and of your team. We talked a lot about how culture matters and this foundation of emotional intelligence. And I'll just share quickly, the software giant SAP is really great proof of this. They've scaled the Search Inside Yourself program within their organization. They've trained over 11,000 employees. At least as I last heard, that number keeps growing. They have over 8,000 active participants in this virtual community. And they really view this work as enabling some lasting success and well-being at work. And as a result, they've actually seen a 200% return on investment in their investment in SIY training, with things like increased employee engagement, less absenteeism, among other things. So I'd really encourage you to stay connected. Feel free to follow us on social media. Of course, if you're interested in bringing any of these programs to your organization, please reach out to us at info@siyglobal.com. We would love to have a conversation about anything that might have landed with you here today. And of course, visit our website, siyglobal.com, for more information about any of the programs. And I'll just leave you to close. I think Brene Brown summarizes what we've been talking about so well in her book, Dare to Lead. She wrote, if we want people to fully show up, to bring their whole selves, including their unarmored whole hearts, so that we can innovate, solve problems, and serve people, we have to be vigilant about creating a culture in which people feel safe, seen, heard, and respected. So thank you all so much for joining us today. It's such a pleasure to be with you and to share all of this information. I so hope that together we can contribute to work environments where people do feel safe, heard, seen, and respected, where we can all really show up with those whole hearts and feel a sense of connection and thriving at work. So again, thank you so much for being here. Hope that you take some of this wisdom out and share it with your team and colleagues. All right, have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone. And thank you again.